This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, old sports, and welcome to the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. I'm Dan Newman, your co-host. I am joined, as always, by Andrew Newman, and we have a very exciting Yankee-centric theme for you on our latest episode. Andrew, how are you doing?
I am doing well, Dan. This is one that we had kind of talked about doing in the past, and I don't know whether it's a really intensive episode or whether it's a light, breezy episode by our standards. I'm not exactly sure where it's going to go, but I feel like this is one that, and myself included, a lot of people kind of know the joke aspect of it and kind of know the pop culture take on it. So I'm actually interested to kind of get into the sort of, I don't know if minutia is the right way to plug a show you're about to do, but the sort of the granular details of each of the comings and goings here.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the Yankee firings of Billy Martin, and we'll obviously get into the details a little bit more in just a second here. I think there's kind of a couple things at play. I think most people, if you are if you're somewhat of a fan of sort of the Yankees, or you know that era in the Yankees, most people, I think, if they know about a single firing, they know about the first one, because it was the first one. It happened in a dramatic way. There was a very dramatic episode. I think what people know less about is the subsequent hirings and firings. They know that they all happened, but they don't necessarily realize that, you know, each one sort of had its own unique story. And then I also think it's sort of worth examining, and we'll just do this sort of in passing here, that bringing Billy Martin back and firing him and bringing him back and firing him over and over again was just sort of another part, a central part of a really crazy 15 or so year period in the history of the Yankees. Steinbrenner did some crazy things with Billy Martin, but he also did a lot of crazy things with a bunch of other managers too.
Yeah, and we're going to kind of touch on those because there will be times where Billy Martin is fired and becomes the manager again 14 months later and is not replacing the guy that replaced him. That there were subsequent firings and things in the middle. So we'll obviously talk about some of those. And then we'll probably start at least with, you know, a couple of Billy Martin had been fired in his own right a couple of times before he even became the Yankees manager, and in some other places that we'll at least touch on. The hot take I want to share right at the top. I think at least 3 of these, if not 4 of them, are justified. Are absolutely justified that Billy Martin deserved to be fired. Where the crime lies is in continuing to rehire the guy after you fired him for a good reason 3 times, or really well before that. But a good amount of these were certainly things that most people would get fired over, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, and just to forewarn here, and I don't think this brings us into bad language territory, but I will use the word ass at one point, and I don't know if you know the story that I'm referring to, but there's one of the stories of one of these firings that you have to use the word ass, because the story is just not complete without it. So, and I guess the other thing on sort of a more serious note is that these stories, some of them are funny, some of them are tragic. Some of them are maybe a little bit of both. But I mean, the story of Billy Martin, and I guess what you can only call a very codependent relationship with George Steinbrenner, it really is sort of, it's sad that the guy couldn't get out of his own way with his demons, his addictions, you name it, and eventually just ended his life in ruin, more or less. And as we watch the story of these firings, you can kind of see that develop basically throughout the 1980s.
Yeah, and I think what also this kind of underscores is, and most people know this already, but like just what an absolute disgrace in a circus the Yankees were in the 80s. They are very quick to point out Steinbrenner used to always be that they were the winningest team in the 80s and that a lot of people didn't realize it. Well, the reason they didn't really realize it was because of this kind of behavior. There's a documentary on Peacock that just came out. It was a 3-part documentary on the 1990 team. So a little bit beyond the scope of this, although they do begin with some Billy Martin stuff. And it just goes to sort of underscore how unlikely it was that they got this turned around to what they got it turned around to in the late 90s, but also just that, like, this was, I mean, they barely ever got through a season without a manager being fired. It was really an absolutely, and then when you factor in everything with Winfield and things like that, just a real embarrassment.
George Steinbrenner bought the Yankees in 1973. Beginning in 1974, they had 1, 2, 3, and I'm not even going to count interim guys here, but just regular full-time managers. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 managers from night, and then 5 of those were Billy Martin. They had 18 managers from 1974 to 1991. They've had 4 managers. That's 17 years. They've had 4 managers now for the last 32 years. So in basically twice as much time, they've had, less than about 20% as many managers, 17% or whatever it is. So the stability of the Torre Girardi Boone years is only all the more jarring when you have an idea of what went before.
So I was just going to say, should we just briefly sort of go over Billy Martin's, early pre-managerial playing career, upbringing, whatever? Or, I mean, we can probably do that fairly quickly.
Yeah, why don't we just kind of give the backstory of sort of him, his career, and what gets him to the mid 1970s.
Sure. So, and you can kind of fill this in. I wasn't going to do a ton of his early life, except to say he was from Berkeley, California, so the Bay Area, just north of Oakland, who's going to come back into this a little bit. Comes up to the Yankees in 1950. Yeah,
yes.
Right as they're, right at the dawn of the Stengel era. The Yankees won in 49. He's on the teams that win in 50, 51, 52, 53. Is good buddies with, a young Mickey Mantle who comes up the year after he does in 51. Probably to the detriment of both of them. I think Whitey Ford was in that mix as well, although it seems like Whitey Ford was always able to know when to cut things off a little bit better than the other two. Misses a year in 54 for military service. Again, is back with the Yankees in 55 and 56 to win another championship in 56. And then in the 57 season is traded to the Kansas City Athletics, largely just to get him away from the Yankees as a bad influence. Is that accurate?
It is. He was a great postseason player. And in those days, postseason only meant the World Series. But he doesn't get into the 50 World Series. He only gets into one game in the 51 World Series, one at bat. He hits 217 in the 52 World Series with a home run and 4 RBIs. 53, he has one of the great World Series in Yankee history. If there had been a World Series in 1953, he would have, if he'd been an MVP in 1953, he would have been the MVP. 52 also, he makes a very famous catch on a pop fly off of with the bases loaded when a pop up by Jackie Robinson. 53, he hits 500. He gets the game winning RBI in Game 6 of the World Series. Hits 500. Comes back, plays in the World Series in 55, plays in the World Series in 56. But the Yankee ownership, Dan Topping and the general manager, George Weiss, really, Stengel loves him. Casey Stengel absolutely loves Billy Martin. But the ownership, the front office thinks he's a bad influence on Mantle, thinks he's a bad influence on some of his other teammates. Really kind of comes to an head in early 57 with something called the Copacabana incident, where they're at a party for Billy Martin's birthday. There are some loud, drunken members of a bowling team who are screaming racial slurs at Sammy Davis Jr. Some Yankees object to this. There is or is not a fight in the lobby or the restroom of the Copacabana. It's possible that a Yankee player hits one of these drunks. It's also possible that it's a security guard. Bad publicity, headlines, all these things. And that kind of serves as an impetus for the Yankees to finally trade away Billy Martin, as they do with most of the players that they want to get rid of in the 1950s. They first trade him to the Kansas City Athletics. He then bounces around. He spends some time in Kansas City, Detroit, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and then finally ends his career with the Milwaukee Braves. I'm sorry, no, he goes to the Milwaukee Braves very briefly and then on to the Minnesota Twins, and that's the end of his career. So the last 5 years of his career, he's on 6 different teams. So you're starting to see some of the instability. He's bitter towards the Yankees. He's particularly bitter towards Casey Stengel,
who he had been very close with going back to when he played in the minors under Stengel.
Yeah.
And I've seen people compare it to this kind of the through line of Stengel, and admittedly it was later in Stengel's career, but Stengel as a player kind of learned a lot from John McGraw when Stengel was on the Giants, and Martin as a younger player, ultimately going on to manage, learns a lot from Casey Stengel, but that relationship pretty much is severed when he's traded away. Is that right?
Yeah, I could do some more research on that. I don't know how, if they never speak again, if it takes a while, but it's very strained, and if nothing else, it sort of shows you the emotional vulnerability of somebody like Billy Martin. Never knew his own father, feels very abandoned by Stengel, that type of thing. Shortly after, and he always thinks of himself as a Yankee at heart, even though he's been associated with all of these other teams. And shortly after his playing career comes to an end with the Twins, he I don't know what he does. Okay, so he spends a lot of time in the 60s with the Twins organization, scout, manager, coach, that type of thing. And then in the late 60s, he begins his own managerial career.
Yeah, and by the way, it says here in 1966, it says Martin damages his chances of promotion to the managerial job by getting into a fight with Twins traveling secretary Howard Fox. The Twins and Yankees shared a charter flight, and the players got rowdy. Martin refused Fox's request that he intercede with his former teammates, including Mantle and Ford, to get them to quiet down. When the Twins reached their hotel, Fox was slow to give Martin his room key, violating baseball's usual etiquette that the managers and coaches got there first. When Martin demanded it, Fox threw it at him, and after words were exchanged, Martin hit him in the face. Martin was fined by Griffith when the melee. So he didn't. And then when the manager was fired in '67, Martin did not get the job.
But he eventually gets it, I believe, in '69. He becomes manager of the Twins, manages them. Go ahead.
As you say, in '68, they give him the job as the in Denver with the Denver Bears, which is the Twins' top minor league affiliate. I don't know if that was before the AAA classification, but the top farm team.
69, he takes over the Twins. They win the American League West, so he's a division winner in his very first season. They're 97-65. They get swept in the ALCS by the Baltimore Orioles, but there's no shame in that because that late 60s, early 70s Orioles team is one of the great kind of powerhouses in baseball history.
The first ALCS, by the way.
The first ALCS, yeah, exactly. That's the first year of division play, but nonetheless, his drinking and his behavior, including apparently, and this is from Wikipedia, but it's probably true, he kicks Hubert Humphrey out of the locker room when Hubert Humphrey, who had just been vice president and just lost the presidential election to Richard Nixon the previous year, Billy Martin kicks him out. Maybe that's why Nixon ended up going to Billy Martin's funeral 20 years later. He was happy about Billy Martin's loyalty to him. So.
To be honest, I didn't know that part of it. I had it written down about the contract stuff, but I didn't know the Humphrey part. So when you said he kicks Hubert Humphrey, I didn't know that out of the locker room was going to be the next part. I thought maybe he kicked it. He mule kicked him or something like that. But Martin asks for a 2-year deal. Clark Griffith, who is still the same, cheap guy that he was when he was running the team in Washington, balks at that. He's also upset about Martin's, drinking and behavior on the road. He's upset that Jim Cott didn't pitch in a game. So they basically irreconcilable differences. He's fired on October 13th, 1969. And is on his way to his next spot,
which is the Detroit Tigers, a team who had been in the World Series in 68. They had been a decent team for most of the 60s, but like he did with the Twins, he has immediate success. 71, they're 91-71. They finished second in the AL East, which is again to that powerhouse Baltimore Oriole team. They're actually not as good in 72, but they win the AL East. They lose in 5 games to the Oakland Athletics, so they're a game away from the World Series. They almost make it to the World Series over that Oakland team, which was just beginning their own dynasty. And then in 73, he doesn't make it through the whole season. They're 71-63. He gets fired from Detroit again. And then most of my research, and I think yours too, was on his Yankee years. So I'm taking a lot of this from Wikipedia, but nonetheless, the last straw is when he feels that the umpires are not calling Indians pitcher Gaylord Perry for spitballs. So he orders his pitchers to throw spitballs, tells the media after the game that was what he had done, and he gets suspended, and the Tigers fire him after a 90-win season, a division title, and another season where they're, not quite as good, but 2 teams, 2 playoff appearances, 2 turnarounds, and 2 firings.
Yeah, and the Magic's not going to be as good here in this next one. Before the 73 season is even over, he becomes the manager of the Rangers. The Rangers are a lowly team. There's 23 games left in the season when he takes over for as the manager. I believe looks like they're 47-81 at the time he takes over in 73. Finishes out the 73 season, manages for 74, and I believe they're maybe a little bit better in 74.
They're a lot better.
Yeah, they're a lot better. 84-76. They finish in second. My guess is in 1974, second place with 84 wins is still 10 games behind Oakland, but
They're 5 games behind Oakland, but
It's only 5.
they have the rookie of the year, who's a guy who you probably know this name, even though if you don't know it's him, Mike Hargrove, the future manager of the Indians in the 90s. And then they also have the American League MVP, which is Jeff Burrows, who's an outfielder, and this is really his sort of one really good season. The guy's a lifetime 260 hitter, but he leads the league in RBIs and is named MVP of the American League from the Texas Rangers. So yeah, he's got, they missed the playoffs, but he's got the MVP, he's got the rookie of the year, and things are looking up. But then the following year, after 95 games, fired again.
Yeah, and there had been rumblings. So he's fired on July 21st, 1975. I guess there had been rumblings even a few years earlier that the Yankees were somewhat interested in him, or at least that he had been suggested to George Steinbrenner when he first took over as being the manager of the Yankees. I guess we should probably talk about his firing in 1975 from Texas before we get to the Yankees aspect of it. Yeah, this is where every one of these I'm like, we can skip over that. Then I'm like, no, we really can't skip over any of this. In July, after let's see some of the stuff they have here. Martin struck Rangers traveling secretary Burton Hawkins, allegedly for organizing a players' wives club. In July, after a dispute with Corbett over whether to sign.
We just have to stop, though. Why would you care so much about that you had to hit somebody?
Well, and that's where obviously he's going to be the protagonist of this in terms of we're going to talk about Billy Martin, and we're certainly going to talk about him in the context of George Steinbrenner. And really, there's no reason to give George Steinbrenner any kind of pass for all of this. But we're now going to come up on Billy Martin 3 times being fired. Very few of them being strictly due to Billy Martin was an alcoholic, until the day he died. He tended to be violent, as we see here, not necessarily always violent towards people who could fight back, or it would have been a wise career move to fight back. And this also this is 1975. And as much as 1975, the world in 1975 is different than it is now, a lot of this sounds like things that would have happened in 1875.
Yeah, this
like when we did these things.
King Kelly episode.
Yeah. Oh, he was drunk. He was drinking too much moonshine at some sort of hootenanny, and the manager tried to get him back to the team's covered wagon, and he punched him in the face. Like, 1975 is relatively the modern era at this point, to just be hauling off punching people because you didn't like how they were doing their job. Like, this guy was doing his job. So he does that. Said in July, after a dispute with Corbett over whether to sign free agent catcher Tom Egan, Martin told the media that the owner who had made a fortune selling plumbing pipes knows about as much as baseball as I do about pipes. Corbett began consulting with the minority owners to decide whether to fire Martin and inform the manager this. One day later, on July 20th, after Martin ordered the public address announcer to play Thank God I'm a Country Boy during the 7th inning stretch, instead of Take Me Out to the Ball Game, as Corbett instructed, he was fired.
And this
was at least, it says here, to the traveling secretary who was partial to Don't Go Messing with a Country Boy.
Hillbilly Jim's theme song.
But Thank God I'm a Country Boy was the Orioles song too, and I'm assuming it was back then. I don't,
I should also note here, and I don't know how much of this, like his actual demeanor, but for a guy who grew up in the Bay Area and then spent most of his professional life in New York City, he really seems to think he's a cowboy. I don't know whether that's like because of mantle or what that is, but he puts on this like cowboy affectation, and it's a guy who,
he's a jerk.
Little Imus reference there. But,
Imus is the same kind of way. He was always with the cowboy clothes.
Yeah, Imus at least was from like rural, like he was from like the rural part of California. He was from like Fresno. He wasn't from Berkeley. And I know Berkeley now is not Berkeley 80 years ago, but there aren't two less cowboy places in the world than Berkeley and New York City. But anyway, I digress. 75 Yankees. They're playing in Shea Stadium. Steinbrenner's owned the team for a couple of years. They're being managed by a guy by the name of Bill Verdon, who I believe was a pitcher. No, he was a position player. He was a center fielder. He was actually on the 60 Cardinals, the team that beat the Yankees in the World Series on the Bill Mazeroski home run. He had managed
Pirates.
What did I say?
Cardinals. He was on the 60 Pirates, or he was on the 60 Cardinals?
No, he was on the 60 Pirates. He started his career with the Cardinals.
Oh, okay.
The vast majority of it was with the Pirates. He was on the 60 Pirates, wins a World Series, actually Rookie of the Year in 55 with the Cardinals, and then goes to Pittsburgh shortly after that. He'd managed the Pirates for a couple of years. He actually started managing them right after the 71 season, because I think Murtaugh, I believe, was their manager that retired after 71, and then right after they won the championship. And so he retired. He managed them for a couple of years. Goes to the Yankees in 74 and 75. He's the answer to a trivia question. He's the only Yankee manager since 1923 who was manager of the Yankees but never managed a game at Yankee Stadium, because his all of 74 and the most of 75 that he managed was all at the Yankees were playing at Shea. They're just about 500. I think they're 53 and 51, and they fire him and they bring in Billy Martin only a few weeks after his firing from the Rangers. And in August of 1975, Billy Martin is now the manager of the New York Yankees for the very first time.
And this is a Yankees team that obviously had 6 or 7 more good years after Martin is fired, or after Martin is traded in 57, win the title in 58, World Series in 60, win it in 61, 62, lose 63, 64. Wheels fall off. They bottom out in the late 60s. Early 70s comes. Steinbrenner buys the team in 73. They renovate Yankee Stadium, so 74 and 75, they are playing at Shea. And it's really during that period that the team does start to turn around a little bit.
And right before the 75 season, they signed Catfish Hunter, who was the first free agent in baseball history. And there's the story of how Catfish Hunter became a free agent is, too much to get into right now. But they had signed the reigning Cy Young winner, Catfish Hunter, in the 75 offseason.
And also, just, from a Steinbrenner standpoint here, he had taken over the team in 73. Ralph Houck was still the manager. They let him go at the end of the 73 season. He brings on Verdon. Verdon manages 74 and part of 75. And then they bring in Martin. So there's not necessarily a track record of, wow, this guy's going to fire a lot of managers in, quick succession here at the point. He's only hired and fired one guy so far.
76, they're back in the refurbished Yankee Stadium. They win the pennant. They win the American League East. Then they go on to win the American League Championship Series in 5 games over the Kansas City Royals. They'd actually beat the Royals in the ALCS each of the next 3 years. This is the famous home run by Chris Chambliss to win it off of I think it's Art Littell is who he hits that home run off of. This is what you would think of as the 70s, kind of the Bronx Zoo Yankees. But there's also a couple guys on this team that are not there or not there for much after 76. Doc Ellis is one of the star pitchers on the team, more famous as a Pittsburgh Pirate. Doc Ellis was Munson's there, Chambliss, Roy White, who'd been with the team for a long time, Mickey Rivers. So this is basically the Yankee team that you're going to know for the next couple years. But other than Catfish Hunter, maybe not a team with a real marquee superstar. They get swept in the World Series in '76 by the Cincinnati Reds. Second World Series in a row for them. I think one of the most famous things that happens in that World Series is that Munson has a very, very good World Series, but Johnny Bench has an incredible World Series, sort of the battle between two of the great catchers in the major leagues. And so going into the '77 season, yeah, they won the pennant, but they got embarrassed in the World Series. And so Steinbrenner wants to hit the free agent market, the very new free agent market, because free agents sort of just became a thing over the last year or two. And so Steinbrenner goes out and gets Reggie Jackson.
And Reggie Jackson is, it's funny because I'm currently, just to show that I live the gimmick, I'm currently reading a book on the '70s A's, sort of in my free time at the moment. So I'm getting a lot of the Reggie Jackson story of just a couple of years before this. In fact, the part of the book I was reading before I walked in here to do this episode was on the '72 ALCS, where those A's played the Tigers, managed by Billy Martin. Reggie Jack, there's a lot of quotes you can talk about with Reggie Jackson. The one I think that most sums up his attitude, especially as it relates to this team this year, is he said, "I didn't come to New York to be a star. I brought my star with me." And I think Reggie Jackson, after all of the turmoil in Oakland, despite all the winning, and then sort of the year in Baltimore that, he really was kind of foisted upon him, he wanted to come to New York to be, to win and to make big money, and whether he said it or not, to sort of elevate what they didn't call us at the time, but to elevate the Reggie Jackson brand. But he was also not a guy who was willing to see things from others' point of view, shall we say. He was Reggie Jackson. He was going to be Reggie Jackson. And if Billy Martin wanted to tell him otherwise, well, that was going to be tough for Billy Martin.
And he gives that interview, and this is sort of maybe I don't know if it's the golden age, but this is an age when magazine articles were a really big deal. And what magazine is it? I think it's Look magazine. I could be wrong about that. He gives an interview where he says, I'm the straw that stirs the drink. I guess I should say me and Munson, who was the captain of the team, but Munson can only stir it bad.
See, he doesn't need to add all this stuff. The money quote is already, "I'm the straw that stirs the drink." That's going to get him the headlines. It's catchy. Everybody knows what you're talking about, but it's good enough. It's also more pithy. And then he's got to go, "Well, I guess me and this other guy, but screw him, by the way." Like, you don't need to add all that other stuff in there. Just say you're the straw that stirs the drink. And that's probably going to rub people the wrong way, but not as badly as being. Just to clarify, by saying that, I'm insulting Thurman Munson, the beloved captain of this team,
who all his teammates love, and who I think Martin loves him. And he's not necessarily the friendliest of men, Thurman Munson, but he's, and then when the article comes out, Munson says, Reggie Jackson says, "I was misquoted." And Thurman says something along the lines of, like, for 4 effing pages. So
by the way, it was Sport magazine.
Sport magazine. Okay.
That was originally what this podcast was going to be about, was we were going to get back issues of that and read them cover to cover. And it was going to be, "Hello, old sports," like the old Sport magazine. Don't edit that out.
I won't.
All right. So that's sort of the backdrop. They go into the '77 season. The Yankees have been to their first World Series in 12 years. It's but they were also to an extent embarrassed in that World Series by the Reds. There's a lot of volatile personalities on this team. And normally when you talk about a team with volatile personalities, you say, well, it's up to the manager to manage those personalities. Well, he's even more volatile. And then the guy above him, the owner, is more volatile than that, or at least equal to it. So there's really nobody there who's the voice of reason that anybody's going to listen to except Munson. But Jackson, Martin, and Steinbrenner all don't have to listen to Munson.
Yeah, and also there's issues. Reggie, I don't know a lot about the Munson-Martin relationship, but like Munson's feuding with Reggie, but then Munson's also feuding with the front office. Reggie's having issues with the front office. Billy Martin's obviously having issues with Reggie and with the front office. And then there's all these other guys too. You know, it's not like everybody else is, I mean, Lou Piniella, Greg Nettles, all of these guys, these are not necessarily calm, easy to get along with guys in and of themselves. Sparky Lyle, who's the Cy Young Award winner in 77 that year as the closer, he's got his own issues, especially the following year. The big moment in 77 is at Fenway Park when Reggie Jackson is perceived to have loafed on a base hit to right field. Martin pulls him out and replaces him in the middle of an inning. Reggie Jackson goes after Billy Martin and is restrained by Yankee players and coaches. It's a very sort of volatile year, especially between Reggie and Billy. But at the end of the day, Jackson ends up hitting 3 home runs in Game 6 of the World Series against the Dodgers, one of the great moments in baseball history. And Billy Martin is sort of first out of the dugout to congratulate him when he does this. And the Yankees, despite all of the Bronx Zoo goings on throughout the 77 season, win their first World Series in 15 years. Martin's first as manager, Steinbrenner's first as owner. So after 77, you say, okay, maybe all could potentially be forgiven. They won the World Series.
And for Billy Martin, and well, I guess you can't say it for the Yankees in general, but for Billy Martin, it would never be this good again. This was sort of the apex. And didn't he get a new contract like right before Game 6 of the World Series too? Didn't they give him a deal for like the future, like right before that?
That sounds right. I don't know if that's, I don't have that verified, but that sounds like it could be something that was the case.
And I'll be honest, I saw that in the Bronx is Burning miniseries years ago, which is great, but they could also have fabricated that part of it or, conflated some different things. So just because we're not trying to do a history of the Bronx Zoo Yankees, we're trying to do a history of Billy Martin's hirings and firings. So they go into 78. They're the defending world champions. Reggie Jackson seemingly whatever, I don't, obviously the tensions with everybody else is going to be there. The one thing you can kind of put, though, is especially to start the 78 season, the fans are probably not going to be booing Reggie Jackson anymore after what happened in that World Series and specifically in that Game 6. It's, from a star standpoint, it's Reggie City at that point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. They like Billy. They love Billy, but it's not, the player's always going to be the guy who probably gets the Reggie's personality, and maybe some lingering, racial resentments on the part of some fans, maybe temper that a little bit. But you're right. They're not going to hate the guy the way they might have been inclined to hate him in 77 after what he just did for the team.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of goodwill built up, and it's going to take a while for it to dissipate, or so you would imagine. So where do you want to start in with 78? I mean, I know as early as spring training, there's issues which should come to the surprise of nobody. By the way, I'm quoting pretty extensively or reading pretty extensively from the Bill Madden Steinbrenner book, The Last Lion of Baseball, from and that's 10 years ago or so.
That's one of the ones that I have as well. So I didn't have a ton on the spring training issues. Why don't you sort of color that in a little bit?
Well, I guess it was just, there's stuff with Martin here about, they bring in Goose Gossage, obviously, the famous from Cy Young to Sayonara quote with Sparky Lyle. The morning before one of his first spring training outings, Gossage was shocked when Martin approached him and said he wanted him to deliberately throw at the head of Texas Rangers outfielder Billy Sample. Martin had managed Sample in Texas, and for reasons he didn't bother to tell Gossage, didn't like him. Gossage resisted, telling Martin, "I can't fight your battles for you. I tell you to drill a guy and you're not going to do it." Martin hissed, "You're a worthless piece of S." Since early that spring, Gossage had been hobbled. Phil Pep broke or is it Pep or Pepe, the old Daily News writer? It's P-E-P-E. Pepe broke the story that Catfish Hunter had diabetes. Steinbrenner got mad, saying, "You're helping the enemy by putting something like that in the paper," which, again, really doesn't have anything to do with Billy Martin, but sort of adds color. Steinbrenner that was in 77 when Steinbrenner and Billy Martin almost had the fight over the spring training loss to the Mets. Yankees actually won 9-6, but only after a 6th-run inning. This is spring training again, by the way. Steinbrenner had stormed from his private box through the stands and right into the dugout, where he began voicing his disgust with the team's sloppy play. Martin was outraged. "George, you've got to get out of here," he shouted. Steinbrenner did retreat, but then right away to reporters, the manager had better start pulling this team together. This is a team that won the World Series and has not played a regular game yet, by the way, just to underscore how insane all of this is. And by the way, the first story was totally Billy Martin's fault. New pitcher comes in, "Listen, this guy I used to manage in Texas, hit him in the head." No, well, how dare you? And then this one is obviously Steinbrenner being a lunatic. And they get out of the gate, in 78 slowly. They're really struggling and more. We could go through probably every one of these things, but it's the same couple of stories I just said, kind of repeating themselves in different iterations.
Well, and the crazy thing is, they're not actually all that bad. So let's just do a little thought exercise here. On July 1st, they're 43-33, which is not a great record. They're 9 games out of first. The year before that, on July 1st, they were 42-34, which is a game worse. They were, and in that season, they were a half a game out of first, and then went into first place a day later, and stayed there. Well, I guess they actually did trail a little bit, and then had to come back. But anyway, they were a half a game out of first on July 1st with basically the same record. In 78, they're 9 games out of first, and that's because the Red Sox are on an absolute tear. The Red Sox are 52-24, which is something like a 690 winning percentage. They're on like an all-time pace here. So it's not so much that the Yankees aren't as good as the year before. Ron Guidry's having one of the all-time great pitching seasons in Yankee history. But the Red Sox are just on this tear through the American League. And so the Yankees probably look like they're playing a lot worse than they are, when really they're not doing that much better or worse than they were a year ago.
I guess perception, you have a feeling that in George Steinbrenner's mind, once his team won the World Series in 1977, they were just going to continue to win the World Series every year.
Well, it's like that story, to fast forward a quarter century, when the Yankees won the World Series in 98, 99, 2000, and then lost it in 2001 on the
7th game.
7th game of the World Series on a Rivera error, in
a year where they had to deal with some things.
Rallied around the 9/11, and I don't usually like to say that they inspired the city, but the city did get at least something of a boost, from the Yankee run after 9/11. And in the locker room afterwards, what was it, Cashman he turned to and said, "We've tried it your way."
I think it was Torrey.
We tried it your way.
Yeah. So I don't know. Should we skip forward to July? And I mean, I know we're kind of bumping up against it, but should we get into sort of the end of the first Martin administration here?
Well, the one thing is that he orders the one sort of on-field incident is that he orders Reggie Jackson to bunt. Jackson, being a power hitting outfielder, hasn't bunted in years. He gives Jackson the bunt sign. Jackson doesn't want to bunt. He takes one pitch, and then Martin takes the bunt sign off, but Reggie is so angry that he was asked to bunt that he bunts anyway. Billy Martin announces that Reggie Jackson is suspended for suspended without pay indefinitely. I think it ends up lasting about a week. And by this point, Billy Martin is drinking more. He's spouting off to the press more, and it is just a recipe for disaster. I will tell the story, and this is from a biography of Billy Martin. I guess in '78, the Yankees were still flying commercial once in a while, and they have a flight to Chicago that's delayed. They're drinking at the airport bar. Munson and Gossage are both drunk, listening to country music on a portable tape deck. Man says to them, "Would you mind lowering that a bit?" Munson responded, "Mind your own business, F face." And then Billy Martin sends Elston Howard to ask Munson to turn it down. Munson says, "Who are you, the music coach?" Now Howard's mad at Billy. Munson, who usually gets along with Billy, they get in a fight. Mickey Rivers decides that he needs to get involved and throws a deck of
Which is usually going to help things.
Throws a deck of cards at Billy Martin. Yogi Berra and Dick Hauser, two other coaches, managed to keep everybody apart. Keep in mind again that this is a commercial flight. There's regular passengers on this flight, so they have to sort of run for cover. Steinbrenner realizes that maybe Billy Martin is not the best fit for this team, or maybe he's not equipped to manage. Starts making off the record calls to reporters, questioning Billy Martin's right to manage, and things just get worse and worse as the summer of '78 goes on. And also I should say that the rumors start because the Chicago White Sox are owned for the second time, mind you, by Bill Veeck. Bill Veeck, who we talk quite a bit about in another episode that's going to actually post right around this time when we talk about Comiskey Park. And there's rumors that the Yankees and the White Sox are going to make a trade of managers, that the White Sox are going to send Bob Lemon to manage the Yankees, and Steinbrenner is going to send Billy Martin to go manage the White Sox.
There's actually a conversation that Martin has when they're on the road trip in Chicago, and Veeck says, "I suppose I have only myself to blame if we get swept by you, Billy, considering you could have been managing for me this weekend." Martin said, "What do you mean?" And Veeck said, "Oh, didn't you know? Last month, George wanted to trade you to me. We were going to trade managers, you for Lemon, but I felt I needed to get a player in the deal as well." So all of this was happening. First of all, you can't just do that. I don't think. I know you can't now. Second of all,
first of all, I mean, if nothing else, I mean, you'd need the guy's permission. Like, it's not.
That's what I mean. Yeah, you can't just trade a manager. So this is all in the back of his head. Not even that it's happening, but also that obviously he's doing it without his knowledge. Martin goes to the paper about Reggie Jackson, who's about to be coming back from his suspension. There's obviously more drinking and things like that. And it's getting to the point where Steinbrenner feels like he needs to do something.
We should just divert here for a second to tell a little bit of a backstory on something, because it really you can't appreciate just how crazy this was without knowing a little bit about about this other story here. George Steinbrenner, who had owned the Yankees, was a native of the Ohio area, and he in 1974 was charged with obstruction of justice. He had been charged with making illegal campaign contributions to the Nixon campaign because he thought it would help his company, American Shipbuilding, help get government contracts from the Nixon administration. So and he was not the only one either. There were others in the shipbuilding industry involved in this. So anyway, and where are they here? I think they're in Chicago. Yeah, they're in Chicago. They're at O'Hare, and they're flying to Kansas City. And again, drinking. I don't. It wasn't a commercial flight, I don't think. But they're drinking. I don't know if they're at the hotel, but I think they're at the hotel bar. And Billy Martin starts talking to a reporter, and he makes clear that this is not off the record. This is on the record, and he's talking about Reggie Jackson. And he says, basically, like, how can Reggie Jackson deny what he did with the bunt when it was on video? And Reggie Jackson says, it's like somebody. Hold on, let me get the exact quote. He said, it's like a guy getting out of jail saying he's innocent when everyone saw what he did, because he's saying that Reggie Jackson is a born liar because Jackson denied knowing why he was suspended. And Martin's probably right here. He says, how can he say that? He knows it was on, it's on tape, whatever. He's a born liar if he's saying that. And then he says, and this might be the greatest line in the history of New York sports. He says, the two of them, meaning George and Reggie, are cut out for each other. One's a born liar and the other's convicted. And it's just, for him to come out with that drunk, it's just, it really, I mean, whatever else it is, it's the perfect line.
So they get on the plane to Kansas City. This is back in the days of the reporters flying with the players. As soon as the plane lands, the reporters who had been given that quote rush to phones to make a call. They get Steinbrenner. Steinbrenner asks them to repeat the quote. Steinbrenner hangs up, calls Rosen, who says, now I want you to get on a plane to Kansas City and fire Billy. Steinbrenner made no mention of who was supposed to replace Martin, but Rosen was still thinking about Lemon, the guy they traded for a few weeks ago. After Rosen confirms, because he doesn't want to get on a plane and then have Steinbrenner change his mind. Mm-hmm. So he gets a statement directly from Steinbrenner. He's being relieved of his duties out of consideration for his health. That's usually why a guy resigns, not why a guy is fired. He gets there in the afternoon, and before he can go to fire Martin, he's told that that Billy is resigning. So unclear. I owe it to my health and my mental health well-being to resign. At this time, I'm also sorry for the things that were written about George Steinbrenner. He does not deserve them, nor did I say them. I've had my differences with George, but we've been able to resolve them. So obviously some crossed wires about who said what and whether this statement that Martin was reading was dictated by Steinbrenner.
Sparky Lyle writes a diary of the 1978 season, and it becomes a famous book called The Bronx Zoo. And this is what he said. He said, Billy was still mad at Reggie. He was in the sauce, and he told them that Reggie and George were made for each other. One's a born liar and one's convicted. When George found out about it, it was church. And I've never heard that expression before, but that's how he describes it. It was church. He said Billy then denied that he ever said it, but those guys aren't going to make up something like that. And when he denied it, he had no alternative but to resign. Sparky Lyle actually sticks up for Martin at the expense of Reggie and George in his book, which I guess is not overly surprising. But Martin leaves. They bring in Bob Lemon. And then things get really strange.
Yeah, so there's almost no separation between the first firing and the second hiring, because 5 days later, after he's fired, is Old Timers Day. And I recognize where this could be a delicate situation because Billy Martin is still a legendary Yankee from the, even if legendary is too strong a word, a key player on legendary teams in the early 50s, early to mid 50s, who certainly has earned a right to be at Old Timers Day if he wants to, even if he did just get fired. So they announced that he's going to be there. And I guess Steinbrenner had told Rosen, asked him to please suit up with the old timers in the uniform of his old team, the Indians. Rosen said, "Why would you want me to do that? I'm the president of the Yankees. How's it going to look if I'm out there in an Indians uniform?" Steinbrenner said, "I just want you to stand next to Lemon. You were his teammate, and it'll look good, the two of you standing there side by side." As he stood there on the first base next to Lemon, listening to the gradually increasing ovations for his former rivals, Phil Rizzuto, Roger Maris, Whitey Ford, Yogi Berra, McMahon, Joe DiMaggio. As DiMaggio tipped his cap, Shepard wasn't finished. The Yankee Clipper was accustomed to being the last man introduced at Old Timers Day, and as such, he looked quizzically up at the press box, and I am sure that Joe DiMaggio had some stuff to say about this.
He was irate. We've talked a little bit about this before on the podcast, and I'm a huge DiMaggio fan as far as just as a player and the era and everything, but he was not a nice man, Joe DiMaggio. He famously kicked Billy Crystal. Joe DiMaggio was like 80 years old, and he kicked Billy Crystal because Billy Crystal didn't introduce him the right way at some sort of a function or something. So he insisted on being introduced last and called the greatest living ball player. And when Billy Martin upstaged him, oh boy.
And wasn't there a thing, and this was again in that Bronx is Burning thing in 77, where he was supposed to throw out the first pitch and like whoever, and look, this is obviously the person at the booth, like, should know who Joe DiMaggio is. But like, I guess right away, immediately the person like asked DiMaggio for credentials or something like that. So DiMaggio was just like, okay, and just left.
I think
so
then
they had to track him down. So the PA announcer, Bob Shepard. And now, ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. The Yankees would like to announce today that Bob Lemon has agreed to a contract to continue as manager of the Yankees through the 1978 and 1979 seasons. This was greeted by a chorus of boos. Shepard announced that Lemon would become the general manager in 1980. Then his signs, blah, blah, blah. Shepard, please, your attention, please. Your attention, please. And the Yankees would like to introduce and announce at the same time that the manager of the 1980 season and hopefully many seasons after that will be number one, Billy Martin. He had gotten fired 5 days earlier, and they're announcing that the guy they just hired is going to be the manager for a year and a half, and then the guy they just fired is coming back. There's no like way to you can't even say like this would be like if whatever, because this just is like, this is insane. It's like a schizophrenic is in charge. Like,
and it's not clear that Lemon knew about this.
I don't think he did.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look and see. I mean, that's an important detail that one of us should have, because it's bad either way, but if he found out about it from the scoreboard, that's really bad.
Rosen was at first stupefied and then just as quickly enraged. After quickly changing his clothes, he went into Steinbrenner's office. Said, "George, what you've done to me and even porting me to Lem is just unconscionable. The poor man was booed out of there. We've got everything calmed down around here, and you pull a stunt like this. I know why you didn't want to tell me you knew how I'd react. Well, you're right. This is BS." And then it says, we won't get fully into this, but it says Rosen wasn't the only one who felt that way. DiMaggio was fuming by being upstaged by Martin, who Joe had always felt was ill-suited to manage the Yankees. Unbelievable, he said, shaking his head when reporters asked for his reaction. Instead of going upstairs to Steinbrenner's office, he left the stadium in a huff. Martin was fired and rehired for a year and a half later in the span of 5 days.
Everything I can read does not lead me to believe that Lemon knew about this before he found out about it, which is, again, just bizarre. The only other thing I would mention about that day is that apparently Billy Martin starts drinking, gives another interview where he rips into Reggie Jackson again, and Steinbrenner finds out about it and says basically that heads are going to roll in the Yankee front office if this blows up his day, if it messes up the arrangement, and then a newspaper strike hits the next day. So nobody finds out about it.
So I know we've got more firings to get to, but while I'm on this book and while we're on the 78 season, this has very little to do with Billy Martin.
But it reveals a mentality. I know the story you're going to tell.
The Yankees are blowing this game. The Yankees are catching up to Boston, but then they lose on the last day of the season, right? So it looks like there is going to be a game 163 against the Red Sox at Fenway Park.
Mm-hmm.
Steinbrenner is also furious because they lost the coin toss. I believe he yelled at the guy for not calling the correct thing in the coin toss. But so they're losing. He calls in the traveling secretary, I believe, Kane, during the game. Bill Killer Kane, the team's traveling secretary, was in the press box checking on the reservations for the trip to Boston when he was told Steinbrenner wanted to see him. I just want to make sure you've got everything arranged for Boston. Yeah, everything's set, boss, Kane said. Where's the plane? Newark. Newark? Oh, no, we're not taking off from Newark. We've got to get out of LaGuardia. Newark's too far away. We've been flying out of Newark all season, George. I don't care. I want the plane moved to LaGuardia. We can't move the plane, Kane protested. I don't want to hear anything more. Get it moved. Do you hear me? I hear you, George, but it can't be moved. Well, if you can't get it moved, I'll get someone else who can. No, get out of here. You're finished. Fine, shot back Kane. You do that. Go find somebody else. I don't need to take your S anymore, and stormed out of his office. Steinbrenner phoned down to the ticket office for Jerry Murphy, who had helped out as the traveling secretary for a few road trips. He was 25 years old. He comes into Steinbrenner's office. He says, "You're taking the team to Boston." What? Murphy said. I don't understand. Killer's the traveling secretary. F Killer, Steinbrenner said. I don't want to F Killer. Oh, so you want to F me? I don't want to F anybody. And I can't take this job on a moment's notice. So that was a real productive use of everyone's time. And I think we went right back to where everybody was in the first place.
Incidentally, Lemon was not. I just found it in a book by Marty Appel, who would know because he was a Yankee insider for a lot of years. Lemon did not know. He was surprised when this was flashed on the scoreboard. So the Yankees have this epic comeback under Lemon, 13.5 back. Might have been 14.5 back, actually. Comeback, they win. Bucky Dent hits the home run against Boston. They beat the Red Sox. They beat the Royals for the second straight year in the ALCS. They beat the Dodgers for the second straight year in the World Series. They go into the 79 season with Bob Lemon as the manager, and unfortunately, and this is a real human tragedy piece of it, Lemon's son is killed in a car accident. I think, during the off season, I think it's like just as spring training is starting. And he kind of, he's in mourning over his son, and the Yankees they get off to a slow start. They're about 500 through the first 2 months. They're 34 and 31 in mid-June. And so Steinbrenner dismisses Bob Lemon, and half a season or 2/3 of a season early brings in Billy Martin to finish out the 1979 season.
You hate to see them have to deviate from their well-laid plan there, and bring in Billy Martin a little earlier than he was anticipated to bring in. So he comes in when in mid-June of 79 is when he takes over. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so he takes over in mid-June of 79.
And let me just clarify: his son was killed. Lemon's son was killed just after the World Series, not right before spring training.
Okay, so it's obviously the 79 season for the Yankees is most known for Thurman Munson's death in early August. I guess it's sort of just happenstance that Martin happens to be back by then.
Yeah.
So, really, it's tough to imagine if that was going to what the 79 season would have turned out to be without that. And it feels a little silly to talk about because obviously, their captain, who's still a young man in life terms, if not in baseball terms, is it's hard to sort of speculate on it from a baseball standpoint, but hard to imagine anyone, and especially with how good the Orioles were in 79, hard to imagine anybody steering that in the right direction after something like that happens.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. But it's less what happens on the field and more what happens in Minnesota in the middle of October that leads to firing number 2.
Yeah, and this is sort of the one a lot of people, I think, like if people go, oh, and then they fired Martin, in this year, or then they fired Martin in this year, I think a lot of people's retort is, oh, is that the one with the marshmallow salesman? And unless they're talking about this one, they are wrong. Because this is the one where he gets into a fight with a marshmallow salesman, and his second campaign as Yankee manager is over after just 2/3 or not even 2/3 of a season in 1979. Would you like to give us the details on his marshmallow salesman fight?
Let me see. Give me 1 second. So apparently, this guy is trying to talk to him about how he thinks 2 managers are great guys, and that's Dick Williams in Montreal. Dick Williams, who had previously managed the Red Sox, the A's in the early 70s. He was the manager of the Impossible Dream Red Sox in 67. Then he managed 2 years of the first 2 world championships for the A's in the early 70s. Dick Williams was the manager. And this is at like an autograph show or something in Minnesota. So it was Dick Williams from Montreal and then Earl Weaver from the Orioles. And this guy is telling Martin how he thinks they both deserved to win the award that year, which, I mean, that's not an outrageous statement. The guys won the award. It's not like you're saying somebody else deserved to win it. Billy doesn't want to hear about these 2 guys because those are the 2 guys that Steinbrenner is always threatening to replace him with. So finally he says to the guy, Dick Williams is an a-hole. They both are, and so are you for saying that. Billy says, what do you do for a living? The guy says, I'm a marshmallow salesman. Billy gets a good laugh out of that.
It's a little weird that even then somebody's job was just selling marshmallows.
Yeah.
Like he didn't sell other stuff. It was just marshmallows.
I'm guessing probably wholesale, not like door to door, like, or like on the street, like, hey, do you want a marshmallow? But
outside the stadium with a cart.
So they're in a bar. Billy says that I bet you $500 you can't knock me out. Eventually, I guess they're trying to walk out to the lobby to fight, apparently, but then Billy turns and punches the guy in the mouth. Steinbrenner finds out about it and says, we can't keep having these things happen every 2 months. Fires Billy Martin. Billy Martin actually goes to Oakland for 3 years. This is kind of the last time where it's anything but just sort of weird, because at least in this case, Billy Martin, he does get another job. He goes to the Oakland A's. They call it Billy Ball. And he actually has, a decent enough time with the A's, manages them for 3 seasons, 80, 81, and 82, although he actually doesn't get hired until midway through the 80 season, it looks like. Or no, he's there for all of 80. I'm sorry. He's there for all of 80. He's all 3 full seasons, 80, 81, and 82, although 81 is a strike year. has, among others, a young Ricky Henderson on his team. They make the playoffs in 81 and go against the Yankees in the ALCS, but they get swept. And then they kind
They
of
actually win. They win a playoff series in 81 as well because the split season.
Yes.
They beat the Royals in the I guess divisional round or whatever they called it that year.
That was that whole thing where they divided the season into halves and whoever won the first half. And I think, who was it? I think it was Cincinnati that year had the best overall record in baseball, but didn't make the playoffs. It's a screwy year.
Yeah.
So they make the playoffs. They win a series. They lose to the Yankees. I think after Martin had said, like, we'll beat Steinbrenner like a drum or something like that, but they got beat. And then they kind of bottom out in 82. They go 68 and 94. And, Martin gets fired by Oakland at the end of the 82 season. Finley had sold the team by this time. Finley hired him, but then at some point in that 80 to 82 time period, there was a divorce, and Finley couldn't afford to sell the team or keep the team, and his wife didn't want a piece of the team as part of a divorce settlement. So Finley has to sell the A's. The new owners aren't as big of a fan of Billy Martin, so ends up getting fired by Oakland at the end of the 82 season.
Yeah, I believe they actually sold to the Levi Strauss people. Like the jeans people.
Well, Billy is a cowboy, so.
It says here in October 20th of 82, 3 weeks after the season ended, the A's fired him. The Haas's did not hold Martin responsible for the on-field debacle, but they had grown concerned about his off-field behavior and feared he was growing unstable. Incidents included considerable drinking, traveling with a mistress while on the road. The last straw came when Martin trashed his own office after team officials refused him a loan to pay a tax debt. And according to this, they say there has been some speculation over the years that he had been assured of Steinbrenner by Steinbrenner that if he should so happen to find himself in need of work for the 1983 season, that the Yankees would be open to a reunion. In other words, if you can get yourself fired, we'll bring you back. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't think Billy Martin really needed a grand reason to get himself fired. I think he just kind of reflexively did it a lot. But, interestingly enough, it's a relatively successful time in Oakland. I mean, they had been horrible since the dismantling of the early 70s teams. They'd been really bad, and he comes in and kind of does more with less and gets them back into the playoffs, albeit in a short tenure. But that's really the end of anybody else being willing to hire him.
Yeah, and I think in some of these books that I was looking at, they basically said at that point, too, he decided that the only job he ever wanted again was to manage the Yankees. We should talk a little bit, even though it's not specific to Billy Martin, because I think when I was younger, Bob Lemon ended up managing the Yankees again in this time period. And I think part of me thought, like, oh, they brought Bob Lemon back for a couple years before Billy came back in 83. The actual reality of what happens here is so nutty. So
yeah, we're going to talk. They had 5 different managers in between the 2 Billy Martin tenures here,
and they were good. They hired Dick Hauser, who had been a longtime coach for the Yankees under Martin and Lemon. I think Hauser was the guy who coached the team for a game or two in 78 between the Martin and the Lemon years, who managed the team, I should say. They win 103 games. They go 103 and 59, but they
best record in baseball, I believe.
Best record in baseball. They get fired. They get swept in the championship or the ALCS by the Royals. Steinbrenner tries to get Herzog to fire, I think it's the third base coach in the middle of a playoff series.
Hauser.
Who did I say?
Herzog.
Oh, Hauser. He's managing against Herzog with Kansas City. That's my confusion. Yeah. Hauser won't do it. Shortly after the season, he resigns. He managed the Yankees for only 1 year. has a 100-win season. He's the first manager ever to lose his job after a 100-win season. He's got to be the only guy ever to manage a team only one season, and that season is a 100-win season. Hauser ends up actually going to Kansas City a couple years later, manages them to a World Series in '85, and then actually sadly dies very young of a brain tumor. So that's 80. 81 is Gene Michael. Longtime Yankee executive in the future, former player. And he leads the Yankees to the division title in the first half of the 81 season. They come back for the second half of the 81 season. Keep in mind, too, that the Yankees have nothing to play for in the second half of 1981. They're already in the playoffs, and I'm pretty sure that even if they had won both, they still would have had to play somebody.
To play I don't think there was a bye thing. I think you had to play the second place team.
Yeah, I don't know whether that would have been second half of what. Who knows? Probably the second half.
The whole
team
thing was stupid.
The whole thing was absolutely insane. So, but so then late in the second half of the season, knowing that they're already going to the playoffs, Steinbrenner gets tired of Gene Michael, fires him, and bring back Bob Lemon to manage the team. Lemon has a losing record in the last 25 games, but nonetheless gets to the playoffs based solely on what they'd done under Gene Michael. Bob Lemon had nothing to do with managing this team to a postseason berth. They win 2 series. They win sort of the LDS, such as it was. Then they beat Martin and Oakland in the LCS. And then they lose to LA in the World Series. 82 season, they get off to a slow start. Bob Lemon goes 6-8. So Steinbrenner gets rid of Lemon and brings back Gene Michael, who we just fired for the guy like 7.5 months previous. Michael doesn't last, ends up being replaced for the rest of that season by a guy by the name of Clyde King, who I'm pretty sure Clyde King was a player for the Brooklyn Dodgers in the 50s, a pitcher, manages the Yankees for the last 62 or so games of the season. I think King had been an executive, a front office guy for the Yankees. He either was or he would be again. Everybody, Michael, Lemon, Lou Piniella later, all these guys are manager at some point. They're general manager at another point. So this just weirdly disastrous 3 seasons where, like you said, they make the playoffs twice. They make the World Series once. They win 100 games once. None of it's good enough. And then so for the 83 season, they bring back Billy Martin.
Yeah, and by 83, this is a very different team, obviously. But, in 4 years, a lot has changed since the last team Billy Martin had managed. Reggie Jackson, his former nemesis, is gone. Dave Winfield, Steinbrenner's new nemesis, is there.
Mm-hmm.
Don Mattingly, at 22 years old, although not yet the starter at first base, is on the team. I'm looking at the
Mattingly's playing a lot of outfield at this point.
I'm looking at the sort of combined, composite starting lineup. Ken Griffey Sr. at first base, Willie Randolph at second. Nettles is still there. Winfield, Don Baylor is the DH. Pitching, you still have Guidry, but Dave Righetti is on the team. Gossage is still there.
Righetti throws a no-hitter against Boston on July 4th that year.
Yeah. So it's not fully, it's not the late 70s Yankees, but there's still some of those guys there. And I guess it's the first time, because I had forgotten that he took over in 79, or not 79, in 75. So this is the first time Billy Martin is going to take over as Yankee manager at the beginning of a season.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So they are 91 and 71. They're a third place team. That's the year the Orioles go, I think, coast to coast with the AL East and win the division.
On September 12th, they're 5 games back of Baltimore, with Baltimore coming into New York for a doubleheader. So if the Yankees manage to sweep this doubleheader, they're only 3 back with a few weeks left in the season. They get swept. They're 7 back, and then they never really catch up. I hadn't realized how good this team was. I didn't realize this was a 90-win team, which today that gets you in the playoffs, 90% of the time. So, yeah, this was a team that was, good, not great. Ron Guidry says it's a transition team. They had good players, but the mix was off. And he also said there were more players on that roster who had problems with Billy than there had been in the previous years.
And, it's with Martin, he's just venturing into old, out of control, drunk territory if he's not there already. I guess when hired in 83 at the beginning of it, he had said, this time it's going to be different. This time we'll communicate better. They lose 4 out of 5 on a road trip in Milwaukee and Cleveland. There's rumors that he's going to be gone. Steinbrenner, in typical Steinbrenner fashion, is mad that he had ordered Martin to hold a workout for the team in Milwaukee on the off day before the first game of the trip, and Martin didn't do it. This I thought was really interesting. Martin is caught on the PIX telecast carrying on with his girlfriend.
Oh, she's like passing him notes with her feet or something.
They said who would later become his 4th wife during the Yankees' 6-2 loss to the Brewers. Instead of his customary perch on the top step of the dugout, Martin was sitting on a stool alongside the dugout right in front of the visiting club box, where his girlfriend, Jill Guyver, Guiver, conspicuous in a bright yellow sundress, had a front row seat. Cameras periodically caught her passing notes through the fence with her toes to the smiling Martin. At one point, a frantic WPIX producer, Don Carney, rushed into the press box and asked the writers if they were going to report Martin's action, saying, "I'm very reluctant to show any of this." Madden, the book I'm quoting from, he calls Steinbrenner that night and asks him directly, and Steinbrenner says, "I'm not happy about a lot of things I'm hearing about Billy. He promised he was going to have them work out in Milwaukee. Look what happened. We're playing like bleep. I can't have this. You're going to fire Billy, I asked. He's giving me no choice, but I've got an idea that I'd like your thoughts on." We'll skip over that for just a minute. Steinbrenner meets with Martin. Martin says, "The allegations that I'm not keeping my mind on the game are unjust. There's no way. You're listening to too many other people. I've got my team playing hard. My head is in the game." And I guess he manages to hold on to his job, but in sort of what would become a Steinbrenner thing later on, they fire his pitching coach, Art Fowler.
Yeah, who had been around with them for quite some time.
And then shortly after, and this, I mean, again, no defending this, and it was bad then, it would be even worse now. After the team gets home to Yankee Stadium, the afternoon of a first game of a homestand against the Brewers, Martin's late arriving to the ballpark, haggard appearance, red eyes, suggesting he was coming directly from a bar. He went to his office and slammed the door. A few minutes later, he stepped out of his office and stood glaring at a woman at the far end of the clubhouse, sitting at a table taking notes. The woman identified herself as Deborah Henschel, a reporter for the New York Times who was working on a research project surveying the Yankees players on the All-Star game voting. Just 3 words in a row here I probably shouldn't say, but researcher, ? Kiss my effing Italian-American slur that starts with D. S. Martin shouted at her. "What are you researching? Dressed like a derogatory slur for a woman like that? You're just a hussy. Now get your ass out of here." So, a reporter for the New York Times. So, even in 1983, that's not, even if putting aside the morality of that, not a smart move.
And bizarre things just seem to follow him and the team. This is the year of the Pine Tar game, which obviously is not, that's not a scandal. That's just a crazy story, but they got that. This is the year that Dave Winfield hits a seagull with a ball in Toronto and kills it and gets arrested. So it's just, it really is, it's the Bronx Zoo, but now it's become the Bronx Zoo without the playoff runs in the championship. So Steinbrenner, again, by the end of 83, is kind of had enough.
Yeah, and the team's not. It's weird because Steinbrenner in comments like this, and I mean to his credit, he did seem very uncomfortable with what with the treatment of the reporter there. He calls Don Zimmer in, who's a coach, and kind of interrogates Don Zimmer about everything, which Zimmer would later say was the most uncomfortable he'd been. But it seems like when he's got Martin on his bench as his manager, his eyes are open about who Billy Martin is and what Billy Martin's problems are. And then he fires Billy Martin and he falls back in love with him again. So I guess there was also, didn't he get into a brawl with somebody at a bar in Anaheim, it looks like? Or was that before the 83 season?
I think that's sometime around this time period. It's hard to keep them all straight, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so in the weeks after, taking his own manager, Steinbrenner and Martin had accrued $370,000 in fines. In the weeks after, Steinbrenner was silent about Martin and the Yankees' baseball operations. November 7th of 83, Steinbrenner's father died. After Thanksgiving 1983, Steinbrenner told reporters that he would decide who would manage the Yankees in 1984 by the winter meetings. Those winter meetings came and went. New GM Murray Cook did not. A week after the winter meetings, so mid-December now, Steinbrenner called Eddie Sapir to discuss Martin's future.
I think Sapir is Martin's agent.
Okay. I've thought this over, Eddie, and I've just decided that in the best interest of the team, I'm going to invoke the option on Billy's contract and reassign him to the front office where he'll serve as a special advisor to me. Said Sapir did not even make any effort to plead for Martin's retention. He knew this was merely going to mean extra money and extra years of security for his client. He also knew that in good time, Martin would be back managing again. The next day at a press conference, Steinbrenner introduced Yogi Berra as the newest manager of the Yankees for the 1984 season.
And to be totally honest, I kind of feel like it could have ended there and not been too crazy.
And it would almost seem like, he gave the guy a chance in 79 because he felt like he was fired. He fired him too harshly. And yeah, you're right. It's less effective every single time. It's a worse idea every time.
They struggle in 84 under Yogi. There's questions going into the 85 season. Is Yogi going to keep his job? And Steinbrenner promises Yogi Berra before the 1985 season, you will not be fired. You will manage the Yankees for the entirety of the 1985 season. That lasts 16 games before Berra gets fired and they bring back Billy Martin. And that, of course, famously is what leads to Yogi Berra refusing to set foot in Yankee Stadium till 1999, I think. This really goes deep until well into the, sort of the golden age of the 90s.
Yeah, I think it was 99 or so. Yeah, was it 99 because he was there with Larson when Cone threw the perfect game in 99.
Yeah, I think it kind of crystallized after DiMaggio died in January of 99. I think that's sort of, and it was Susan Waldman from FAN who really kind of facilitated the whole thing. I think that Berra's first time back was something for like a DiMaggio commemoration, probably when they did DiMaggio's monument. But then later in that same summer, they did a full-on Yogi Berra day at the stadium. And that was, like you said, when Don Larson threw the no-hitter. Or, sorry, when David Cohn threw the no-hitter with Don Larson and Yogi Berra in attendance.
So 85, and I was joking with Dan about this before we started, but on March 31st, 1985, so right before the baseball season starts and a month before he becomes the manager of the Yankees again, Billy Martin is the special guest ring announcer for the main event of WrestleMania 1 at Madison Square Garden. And while he's reading from cue cards and I'm sure had a few drinks, he doesn't, embarrass himself or anything. But there are some promos that are taped at a bar in California leading up to that with Billy Martin and Mean Gene Okerlund, who's a man who enjoyed a few drinks himself. And Mean Gene Okerlund tells the story that he went to interview Martin, and he could tell Martin was sloshed. And Martin's like not being mean to him, but kind of like, all right, I'm ready to do this. And he's like, this guy really does not. So they're sitting outside. Martin is wearing his sunglasses the entire time and basically just giving baseball metaphors. But it's just interesting that, like, to get the glimpse of the guy right before he once again becomes the manager of the Yankees, looking for all the world like a guy who's, old and his career as a professional baseball and manager is over. And here he is 3 weeks later, and he's back as the manager of the Yankees. He meets the team in Texas, it looks like, and begins to manage the team.
Yeah, just a couple quick notes. First of all, part of what, and this just shows you the irrationality of Steinbrenner, part of what annoyed Steinbrenner about Berra was that the Yankees early in the season had lost an exhibition game to their AAA team, the Columbus Clippers, and that angered Steinbrenner greatly. And Steinbrenner said, you do something like this and it carries over. I'd like to see more discipline from them. Steinbrenner always a very much a football mentality. The other thing is, it's said that when Berra gets fired, pretty much the whole team is devastated, including, I should sort of just, note, Yogi Berra's son, Dale, who is kind of like a utility infielder on the Yankees in '85. Mattingly's bummed out. A lot of these guys, Winfield, a lot of these guys have dealt with Billy Martin in the past and did not like the experience that they had. The only person who's happy about it is a guy who's never played for Martin in New York, but who played for him for 3 years in Oakland, and that's Ricky Henderson. For whatever reason, Martin and Henderson have a great relationship. I think we talked about this in an episode. I don't remember maybe it was our 1982 episode, where Martin just kind of let Henderson run and steal whenever he wanted to. So Henderson is thrilled that Billy Martin's coming back. Everybody else is less happy.
When Martin addresses the team, he says, I know you guys are mad about what happened. Martin said, don't be mad at me. Y'all got Yogi fired. I didn't. Y'all haven't been playing the kind of baseball y'all are capable of, making a lot of mistakes, not doing the little things you need to do to win ball games. That's all going to change now, and we're going to get back into this race and win this thing, because I'm not going to let you get me fired. On the '85 Yankees,
this is a really good team.
About 4 years ago, I do a weekly show on Facebook, just kind of my own thoughts about current sports. About 4 years ago, suddenly there were no sports to talk about during the early days of the COVID pandemic. And for whatever reason, I came up with this idea to do a bracket of the best New York sports teams to never win a championship. And I had enlisted my brother here's help in filling out this bracket. And one of the teams I think we were very surprised by as we went along was this '85 Yankees team and just how good they were. And Martin is obviously the manager for most of the year. They do come up short of winning the division. Who would have won that division that year? Was it Toronto?
It was Toronto. The Yankees are a 97-win team. They finished 2 games back of Toronto. This is Mattingly's best year as a pro. He's American League MVP. He hits 145 RBIs, 324 batting average, 35 home runs. That's his career high in home runs. People like us who maybe remember Don Mattingly as more the creaky, half broken down guy of the 90s. This was a crazy year for Mattingly, and he was a power hitter. A guy hit, like we said, he hit 35 home runs. They got 2 Hall of Famers in the outfield in Ricky Henderson and Dave Winfield. Henderson steals 80 bases, which I'd imagine is the most in the American League. It is. It's the most in the American League. It's a down year for him, maybe, but it's the most steals in the American League. Ron Guidry, at 34 years of age, is 22-6. The The second, Righetti's the closer with 29 saves. The second best pitcher is Phil Niekro, who wins his 300th game this year, the great knuckleball pitcher, 46 years of age, still manages a 16-12 record. This is a really, really good, they get almost 100 RBIs from Don Baylor and 23 home runs. So this is a really good team who's in it right until the very end of the season, despite some of Billy Martin's antics, which we'll get into in a couple minutes here.
Yeah, I think they're up until late September. They're, in shouting distance of Toronto. They're a game and a half back going into the this 4-game series with Toronto. They lose 2 out of 3, or excuse me, 3 out of 4. They end up 4.5 back and then lose 5 more games in a row after that. And by the time the dust settles, they're 6.5 back. They never get closer than 5 again, or I guess they end up only 2 games back, but that's after the division had been clinched. And they, the season ends with a very strong season and, really reason to be things looking up for the mid 80s Yankees. But for a number of reasons that will not continue. And Billy Martin will not be a part of it, at least not for the next couple of years.
So a number of bizarre things happen during the course of this season. Steinbrenner is really upping his criticism of Dave Winfield, and Winfield is very much alienated from the owner. You mentioned the Peacock documentary on the 90 Yankees. That whole thing comes to a head that year. So lots still to be told in that story. At one point, there's a Yankee infielder by the name of Mike Pagliarulu, who was a left-handed hitter, and who had been a switch hitter in high school and college. And late in a game, Billy Martin just sort of out of nowhere tells Pagliarulu to become a switch hitter again, and that he should go up there and bat from the right side of the plate, just out of nowhere. He later says, "I didn't want to do it. I hadn't hit right-handed in a real game since I was in the minors." But he gets out. I think he strikes out, and kind of makes Billy Martin look like he's just doing bizarre and silly things. But as usual with Billy Martin, much of the bizarre things are off of the field, and specifically in bars. There were 2 young couples at a bar in Baltimore. Billy Martin finds out that one of the couples had gotten married that day. He buys the newlyweds a bottle of champagne. He dances a song with the bride. The newlyweds eventually thanked Billy, got autographs, and went back to their room. A few minutes later, the groom comes back down to the bar and says, "Hey, Billy, we've got to talk. You told my wife she had a pot belly." Billy seems unmoved. He says, "I did not say she had a pot belly." He points at the other woman in the group and said, "I said this woman had a fat ass." So, the scuffle would be largely, and this is what his biographer Bill Pennington writes, if that had been the end of it, that sort of would have been it. But somehow this degenerates into everybody ending back up at the bar 4 or 5 hours later. And again, these stories are just so bizarre, but basically the night ends with Billy Martin getting into a fist fight with one of his pitchers, a guy by the name of Ed Whitson.
I didn't realize this was the same night as this.
Same night. Same night, same
So-
bar.
Fight began when Martin approached Whitson's table after teammate Dale Berra, Yogi's son, told him the pitcher was becoming agitated about something. I'll see what the trouble is, Martin said. Suddenly, Whitson and Martin began grabbing each other and throwing punches. Toppling to the floor as Gene Michael and catcher Ron Hassey rushed over from another part of the bar to break it up. When they were finally separated, Martin began shouting, "That guy's crazy. I just tried to help him. Can't he hold his liquor?" Whitson began advancing at Martin as they were being shoved to the door and into the parking lot where things would be a lot safer in Baltimore in the mid-'80s. It was there that Whitson shoved Martin to the sidewalk and kicked him in the groin with his cowboy boots. "Okay, now I'm going to kill you," Martin moaned as he stood up. Before Martin could get to him, Berra grabbed Whitson and slugged him in the mouth in response to the pitcher tearing his V-neck sweater. Whitson broke loose again, tackling Martin to the pavement in front of the hotel entrance. When order was finally restored, Martin was left with a broken arm and a bloody nose. Although witnesses testified that Whitson had in fact started the fight, and Martin was ultimately exonerated by Steinbrenner, the change of managers had not produced his desired results. Steinbrenner again became convinced that Martin was simply too unstable to continue managing, but who this time to succeed him. So isolated, you could go, it's the end of a long season. Martin's, it's one of those things where people go, well, if you had the context, it's like, well, no, not if you had all the context, only if you had a tiny bit of the context. All the context is it's again Billy Martin in a bar drinking with his players, which you really shouldn't do ever. If you're going to get drunk at a bar, at least don't do it with your players. And there's a brawl that he's involved in, even if he's not the instigator of it. At some point it's like, and how old was Billy Martin at this point? He had to at least be in his 50s.
Yeah.
If not, yeah. It's like at some point, so he's on his way again.
There's one more bizarre story I should tell from this 85 season. At some point he ends up with a health issue and he gets to get an injection and it ends up back spasms, and the side effect of the injection is that he has to something happens with his lung, and he ends up in a hospital in Texas with the Yankees playing against the Indians in Cleveland. Lou Piniella is the substitute manager. Martin starts calling the dugout, getting patched through by the operator, I guess, talking to Butch Weiniger, who's one of the catchers on the Yankees, and he calls about 8 or 9 times in the course of a game. It gets reported in the papers. So the next day, all sorts of people start calling up the Indians saying they're Billy Martin. Please patch me through to the dugout. And Martin can't get through. And so then this is an author by the name of Chris Donnelly, who's written a few books about the Mets and the Yankees of the 80s and 90s. This is the first one he did. It's all about the 85 season in New York baseball. It's called Doc, Donnie the Kid, and Billy Brawl. And it's about how close we almost came to a Subway Series in 1985. I'll put all this in the show notes. And Donnelly writes, the real calls from Martin were far weirder than the fake ones. It became apparent that Billy had left the hospital and was calling from a bar. And I just put a note in there. If he had left the hospital anyway, why didn't he just go to Cleveland and meet the team? Maybe he couldn't fly. But by the third day, he's slurring on the phone to me, and we have a pitching change or a long delay. So I'm just sitting there with the phone to my ear and not talking to him. So, and this is both funny and sad, I guess. But finally, during this delay, he says, I hear this long pause, and I hear him say, Butch, why don't you like me too much? And so Weiniger tries to explain it. I think at one point they started patching Martin through to the Indians dugout. Maybe I just imagined that. But anyway, yet another bizarre story. And like you said, Steinbrenner realizes that this just can't go on any longer.
So Lou Piniella becomes the full-time manager for 86 and 87, if I'm correct here.
Yeah.
The Yankee, how were they in 86 and 87? Not very good, right? Or they were good in 86, right?
86, they were good again. They were 90 and 72. They were 5.5 back of the Red Sox. But I think this was another one of those situations. Let me pull up the results from that year. I think they only finished 5.5 out, but they swept the Red Sox at Fenway the last 4 games of the season in what I'd have to imagine were 4 games. Well, I wouldn't imagine it. These were 4 games the Red Sox didn't need and didn't have to care about. And so, yeah, they were only 5.5 back, but really in reality, I think you can consider them closer to like 7 or 8 back. But yeah, 90 wins, second place.
So for some reason, and we really probably don't have time to get too much into this, Steinbrenner decides he's going to move on from Piniella at the end of the 87 season.
I think Pinella's fed up.
But doesn't Piniella stay as the general manager or something like that? Or as a scout?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. He stays. I think he does become, because I think when he goes to Billy Martin, he says something like, when Steinbrenner goes to Billy Martin, he says, I'm going to make you the manager again. And he says, well, what about Piniella? And Steinbrenner goes, him, I'm going to really F. I'm going to make him the general manager.
So Martin takes over in 88 again, tenure number 5. And just remember, the last 2, he's been fired for basically off-field conduct and drinking and brawling. So it's not even like he was fired because of baseball. Some of the guys on this team, you still have Ricky Henderson is on the team, Winfield, Rafael Santana of the 86 Mets, I believe, is on this team now. Willie Randolph is still there. Mattingly, from a pitching standpoint, Tommy John at 45 years old is on the team. Al Leiter at 22 years old makes 14 starts for the team. Righetti's the closer by now. Guidry's still there at 37, although he starts 10 games for them. But definitely a team that's crawling into that late 80s, early 90s Yankee territory. And this time it only lasts 60-something games before he's played out his string, 68 games. On May 6th, the Martin was beaten up outside a Texas strip club after a loss to the Rangers, exasperating Steinbrenner. Billy and the drinking, he complains to me, being Bill Madden. A couple days later, I don't know what I'm going to do with him, but this can't keep going on like this. You can stop hiring him. would probably be your best bet.
I think he had been out with Mickey Mantle that night in Texas.
How much of a jerk do you have to be that some guy's like, I'm going to beat you up in front of Mickey Mantle?
I think Mantle had left by that point, but fair point. One story I should tell from 90 or from 88, I should say. Buck Showalter is a coach on this team. Showalter, who's basically a career Yankee, never played in the major leagues, but played in the minor leagues, then coached and managed in the minor leagues, and then sort of gets Billy's eye because although their personalities are very different, they both kind of have these like really analytical, deep thinking baseball minds. Showalter impresses Billy Martin by sort of telling him that a certain pitcher can't throw over to first base. And so they're running on this pitcher. This is early in the season, obviously. And, Clete Boyer, who's another Yankee coach and also a former Yankee player, comes over to Showalter and he says, you may think you did a good job today, but you screwed up. And he gives me the keys to his car and says, Billy wants me to come out. Billy wants Showalter to come to dinner tonight with the coaches. Showalter is told that he's the designated driver and they leave at 7:00. Clete Boyer then says, after you finish showering, go across the street to the deli, across the street from the hotel, and get yourself a club sandwich. And Showalter says, well, I thought we were going to dinner at 7:00. Clete Boyer says, just trust me, get yourself a sandwich. They get to dinner and they drink scotch for 3 hours before anybody even talks about ordering food. Billy Martin is using salt shakers and pepper shakers to diagram trick plays. Showalter says, we didn't eat until 11:00. Thank God for that club sandwich. So that was the atmosphere on the Yankees in early 1988. And this is actually, and again, he's not the manager for most of the year because they end up bringing back Piniella. They're 40-28 when he fires them, or when they fire him. That's a decent enough. This team is an 85-76. They finished 5th in the American League East, but the American League East is crazy in 1989. 5 teams, Boston, Detroit, Milwaukee, Toronto, Yankees, all are between 85 and 89 wins. So you don't think of this 89 team because it's right before things get really, 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 really bad. And I might have said 89. I meant 88. But this was, not a half bad team.
And that would be the end of not half bad teams for a while for the Yankees. After Martin is let go, they do go back to Lou Piniella. They basically, Steinbrenner kind of guilt him into taking the job again. And just to sort of another anecdote from this book, he is on the phone with Bill Madden at one point, and he says the reasons he's going to not bring Piniella back for the 89 season. During the course of going through the financial records, I discovered that Lou had been stealing from me. There's an entry on the books listing $10,000 worth of Scandinavian furniture sent to Lou's home. I never authorized anything like that. If Lou's stealing from me, I've got to let him go for the good of the organization. He's like a son to me, and I'm certainly not going to prosecute him, but he's got to go. So he was trying to get Bill Madden to write that in the paper, and luckily Madden was judicious enough to know that was nonsense. But
yeah, I think that would be libel too.
Yeah.
Wasn't true. The other thing is that Piniella does not want to go back and manage the Yankees again. And in fact, when Gene Michael calls him and begs him to take the job, Piniella says, "You said you'd never manage for him again. Why should I?" But they convince him because they don't want to see him bring in Michael convinces Piniella because they're both afraid that if Piniella doesn't take the job, George is going to bring in Dallas Green. Piniella takes the job. Then at the end of the year, Steinbrenner gets rid of Piniella and brings in Dallas Green anyway.
So as much as we could still continue on with the Yankees and a few more years of their circus, that's really not the subject of this. 89, it's Dallas Green into Bucky Dent, and no mention of Billy Martin, at least at that point. And then on Christmas Day of 89, so, only about 14 months after, or what's good.
But in the 89-90 offseason, Steinbrenner is telling Billy Martin, have a coaching staff ready, because if Bucky Dent falters, you're going to be the manager. And Bucky Dent calls a number of guys, including Buck Showalter, saying, when I take this team over in 1990, I want you on my staff.
Yeah, and that was going to be my comment when we talked about this was, if Billy Martin lives, they probably go with him once more. Assuming the 90 season plays out the way the 90 season plays out, they probably go with Billy Martin once more in 90. Maybe he replaces Bucky Dent instead of Stump Merrill. Adding him to that team would have been real interesting with guys like Mel Hall.
Dion,
yeah, him and Dion. Steinbrenner still gets suspended. Gene Michael still takes over, and you'd have to imagine things play out roughly the same way and whatever. But we're left with that as sort of a what if, because on Christmas Day of 89, Billy Martin crashes his pickup truck driving home on Christmas night. I believe he was out at a bar and
There's
crashed into like the entrance to his home or something.
It's something like that. You can get the story pretty easily. I think there have been questions through the years about whether it was he who was driving or his friend who was driving, his friend who survived. So that's another piece of it. I think there have been some questions about who was being truthful and who was driving that night.
It said Reedy, who initially claimed to have been the driver, suffered a couple of broken bones, but was otherwise okay. Neither had been wearing a seatbelt. And, George Steinbrenner puts on a lot of the funeral expenses at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. And that's really it for Billy Martin. A tragic yet unsurprising end. And, certainly the firings, there's some humor in it. There's no doubt there's some humor in it. But a really almost impossible, like generally the only guys who've had multiple tenures with teams, like meaning more than two, who can you think of that's had more than 2 tenures with the same team in any sport ever? And it's probably guys who like also owned the team. Like Curly Lambeau probably coached the Packers 3 different
George
times.
George
Halas, yeah. But like,
yeah, I mean,
not just counting like Herb Williams would always be the coach of the Knicks for a game after whoever got fired.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Pat Riley, but he did it to Van Gundy himself on that Shaq Wade team. Yeah, I mean, the one who comes immediately to mind is Joe Gibbs, who actually had sort of 2 distinct tenures where he was involved with the team as the coach, then left for a while, and then they brought him back. I mean, I know a couple times in the 90s that there was talk that the Giants were going to bring back Parcells. Yeah, I mean, those are the ones that come immediately to mind, but you're right. I mean, it really is sort of it's a bizarre, it's just so crazy that he was fired, why he was fired, that basically every single one of them involves a drunken fight, and that Steinbrenner, for whatever reason, kept hiring it back. And here's the other thing, too. It's not like he won. I mean, they were 90-win teams, but it's not like you can look at it and be like, okay, like, if in 85 they'd been a couple games better than Boston and they'd made the or than Toronto, let's say, and but 83, 85, both those times they were 90-win teams, but they didn't make the playoffs. 79 was weird. It was the Munson year, blah blah blah. So it's not like they were even playoff teams, division winning teams. They weren't getting, especially for Steinbrenner, who always said that the bottom line was championship. It's not like they were winning. It wasn't a devil's bargain to win a championship. It was a devil's bargain to finish second.
Yeah, and just get the wrong kind of headlines.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you have to realize that even though he wasn't as personally self-destructive, Steinbrenner was probably just as unwell mentally, or close to as unwell mentally as Billy Martin was in his own way. It really was sort of a codependent relationship.
Oh yeah. It the one thing I kind of wanted to, go through with this was George Steinbrenner. Like, people kind of have, there's some sympathy in a vacuum to think about, like, Steinbrenner keeps bringing this guy back and then firing him. And, sort of, it's like he's toying with this guy. But that sort of paints Billy Martin in too sympathetic a light. You know what I mean? Like, Billy Martin's getting the guy, like, it's almost painted as if Billy Martin got fired like Yogi Berra got fired. Like, 15 games and they weren't as good as they should have been, and he gets fired. Billy Martin largely each time, again, every time, at least 4 of the times, and it's funny because the one that you might not say is justifiable is the time that they won a championship that year, so you'd almost have to say that one's justifiable. Every other time that George Steinbrenner fired Billy Martin, he probably should have. It's just that he shouldn't have he almost certainly shouldn't have rehired him in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. So I always thought it would be good, and not that I'm trying to overestimate the audience of our podcast, but we do plenty of things that other people have done. I've never seen spelled out sort of in podcast form or even like in documentary, like they tend to gloss over the end. It's like, okay, 78, then he came back from Old Timers Day on Old Timers Day, and then he got fired a bunch of more times and he died. And so I thought it was good to kind of parse out, especially when you realize that there was all this other crazy managerial stuff going on in the background. I mean, that whole 80, 81, 82 thing where, like you said, they had 6 different managerial tenures, I should say, and the Berra thing and just all of it, like it's crazy.
Yeah, and like I said, because we were mostly talking about Martin, we glossed over a lot of that, which we'd have to. But yeah,
I mean, how many times did he bring? He brought Bob Lemon back a couple times. He brought Gene Michael back a couple times. You fire guy 1 and replace him with guy 2, and then the following season you fire guy 2 and replace him with guy 1.
Yeah. So like you said, it's a lot of times it gets like conflated. It's like, well, they won the World Series in 77 and then he got fired in 78 because him and Reggie Jackson got into a fight in the dugout, which was the year before. And that night he got into a fight with a marshmallow salesman. And it's like, no, that's like 4 different things that you just mentioned. So I've always kind of wanted to lay out stuff like this that, the broad strokes of, and I mean, I just study all of this. It's not like I knew it off the top of my head to sort of flesh out questions of the intricacies of it. You know what I mean?
And even the thing that was crazy is even the whole thing where they brought him back, where they were supposed to bring him back, in 1980, even that didn't end up happening. By the time the 1980 season rolled around, he'd been hired and fired again.
He'd already been fired already. By the time he was supposed to take over the team, he'd already been fired.
Crazy. All right. Well, an interesting story. We don't do just New York stuff, but sometimes we can't help sort of really diving into
if anybody else has a similar story from a different city, we'd be happy to tell it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are going to go now, and unlike Billy Martin, we will not return unexpectedly. We'll be back at our next scheduled episode, and until that point, I am Dan Newman,
and I'm Andrew Newman. Goodbye, old sports.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.